Okay, so we're gonna go over the palindrome challenge here for React. So we just started learning React. Now we're going to, yeah, we're gonna go over the palindrome challenge. So it's fairly simple, but we are gonna need to do some very React things like worry about state and props. So if you look at the description, we need to create a text box. So we'll have basically the centerpiece is going to be a text box. We'll get user input, and then so we're going to have to use the onChange listener, so not onSubmit. We could use onSubmit, but we'll just follow the README and we'll use onChange. So anytime what's in the text box changes, we'll have to check if that is a palindrome or not. And then depending on whether it is or is not, we'll change our display somehow. All right, so let's get started. So I've go ahead, I ran npx create React app just so we don't have to sit here for 5 minutes while this installs. So now that it's installed, I'm going to go to cd palindrome app. And I can see in here, I've got the source folder, and then I've got all the default stuff, the app.js. This is going to be mostly what I care about. I'll clear some of this out, and I'll just add a little placeholder thing. So call it palindrome checker. I'm not going to clear out all the, the junk that I don't need here, but I don't need that import. I can go into the public folder. I could clear out some of this stuff as well. I don't need these images, so I'll just delete them. For our purposes here, it's not really necessary, but okay. So yeah, I'm not going to clean out everything, but so we've got our app going here, and if we run it, since we haven't really done too much other than change the JSX that's in here, let's see if it works. So npm start. Pull this over. Okay, so it looks like it works. So that's fine. Yeah, again, this is just incomplete clearing out, but I'm going to ignore that for now. So we have it's working, our server runs, and our app is functional. So our palindrome app checker thing is off the ground. So React, the way it's designed, it kind of wants us to think about the UI in terms of components. So if we have an app, and it's supposed to be a text box and then some kind of message that gets displayed, we could probably reliably break that up into two components. So we'll have a text input component, text box component, and then we'll have a message component. So within source, I could put those files here really anywhere, but standard practice, we'll have a lot of components file within the source directory. And then I'm just going to add a text box.js, and I'll just go ahead and add it now. So these are going to be my two components, in addition to app, which is also a component, right? App is just, we kind of want app to be as much of just like a container as possible. So our app will contain the text box and the message. So you can work on a text box first. So I'm going to start off by doing everything with class-based components, and then we'll just refactor it so that it uses functional components. Okay, so we'll start with imports. So import React. We could use the curly brackets. Really, we just need the component, but I'm just going to do it this way just to show you that there's, a couple ways to do this. So class text box extends react dot component. So I have to refer to this as react dot component because I didn't import component specifically. Okay, and then class components have one necessary method. There's other necessary methods you can have. You can use. What the one you need is render. And render will have a return statement, and this return statement will be whatever we actually want to return after running whatever logic we have here in our text box. So this is going to be our text box. So for now, maybe just to see it, let's do. Okay, so we have our text box. We also need to make sure that we're exporting. So we not only have to import, but we also have to export. So that's the difference from Python. Export. So we'll export text box, and then we'll go into app because we want to put that component in here. We'll have to import it. So import text box from, and we're gonna have to look in our components and then text box. Okay, so now we're importing our text box. Then we need to actually use it. And although when we're writing the class as text box component, it looks like a class, and it is a class. But when we go to use it, just because of JSX, it looks like HTML. So we have our text box, and we'll close that here. So this should show up now. Whatever this text box is rendering, which in this case is just an H2, you should be able to see that. So let's see. Okay, so we have it there. So now we have a component and this app component, and within that component, we have another component, and we can do this on down the line. All right, so we have our text box. So now let's go ahead and add, but we don't want just the text box. What we want actually is input. So let's add that. And I'm gonna get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. Now, if this were like a form, we might want to do some other stuff. But here, since we're just gonna use on change, we really don't need any buttons or anything, right? So the user will type something in, and we'll immediately for every character check if it's a palindrome. So type is text, and then we don't really need to give it a name. We could, but we'll skip that. And then we want to have basically an event handler. So on change is something. So we could just kind of name this handle on change for now, and maybe forever. So handle on change, whatever we end up doing, when there's a change, meaning if someone enters something new or deletes a letter or adds a letter, then this will get called. Okay, so we're gonna have to write this handler function now. So handle on change, and this will take an event. And we'll do, I don't think we need to, but we'll just do event.prevent default, just as kind of a reflexive thing. I don't think it's necessary, but so we'll do it, and we'll console log. Sorry, so we can grab this by doing event.target.value, just like normal HTML. And we'll see that should end up grabbing us whatever the user inputs. So we have an error here. So handle on change is not defined. So that's happening because this is a class-based component. And so this is a method, and we're not referring to it as a method. So we need this. All right, so we'll see if we get, well, that is not displaying. So the tag input, okay, looks like I have a spelling issue. All right, look at our console, and okay, so that is showing up anytime we make a change, right? Whether it's adding or deleting or whatever, that shows up. So, okay, so that's working. So the question is, what do we do with this? So what we need to be doing is taking the user input, and every time they, enter a new letter or remove a letter, we should be checking if it's a palindrome. So we're going to have to add a function or a method that will check if something is a palindrome. So we'll do check if, okay. And we will do, let's take in a word, whatever the user inputs. And we'll just do something kind of easy here. So if word is word dot split dot reverse join, I think that should do it. Then what we want to do is, for now, we'll just console, so that will mean that it is a palindrome. So console.log. And if it's not, then it's not a palindrome. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this console log here. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call check if palindrome. So I'm going to have to use this check if palindrome, and I'm going to pass it the event.target.value. And we'll check if this works. I'll clear this. So it's not working. It's saying this, it's a palindrome every single time. Let me check, what was that algorithm? Maybe maybe it does something else by default. Let's see if that fixes it. Okay. All right, good. So a palindrome, not a palindrome. And let's add some more A's. There we go. Now it's a palindrome. Okay, so what we've done here is we have our input, and we have an onChange handler that gets called here. When the handle onChange gets called, it calls check if it's a palindrome. And for right now, all we're doing is console logging, but we have the basic logic now. So now we know, as in we can see it on the console, if the given state of a user input is a palindrome or not. So what we have to do now is not just console log it, but somehow we're going to have to display to the user if what they've entered is a palindrome. So this is where we have to start thinking about state and props and how we connect everything together. So we could do something here. So we could add like a message. We could have state here, for example. Let's just do that real quick. We'll start it. We'll start off as true. I guess an empty string would, I guess, be palindrome, or maybe it's the same forwards and backwards. So let's say that we have our state, and then we have our handler when there's a change. Instead of console logging, let's say we want to change the state from is palindrome. Well, it's just we want to change our state. So we'll do in a class-based component, there's a built-in function called set state. We can call that this dot set state, and we can pass it pass it the object that we want. So is palindrome, and that will be true. And we do the same thing if it's not a palindrome, except it will be false. All right, so just refresh this to make sure. And so we're not console logging or displaying anything. Let's take a look at our React developer tools. So we have our text box. So yeah, let's look at the text box component, which is what we care about. The state is palindrome is false, so we can actually see our state change. So instead of console logging, for example, we can actually see. And then when it's a single letter, it goes back to true. 1, 2, 2. So it goes from false to true. So the state is actually changing, but what is the point of that? Well, we can do something else based on that state change. So we're going to end up refactoring this, but I just want to point out that we could now that we have state, we could conditionally render some other components. We could have a message that will render depending on whatever the value of this is. The problem with that now is that we're kind of doing two different things in one component. So if we want to have state here, then we're also going to have to, if our message display is dependent on state, we're going to have to pull that in here, or maybe make the message just a child of the text box and pass it in as props, but that might not be what you want to do. So a common issue that you'll encounter is I'm developing a component, and then at a certain point I realize this state needs to be higher up in the chain. So what we're gonna have to do is lift up our state. So in this case, we'll lift it up into app, so that both message and text box can use it. So we'll go into our app.js. And right now it's a functional component, but we're doing this with state. We're going to use state, and we're also going to, we're doing this with class-based components, and we're going to be using state. So we're going to have to change this into a class-based component. So class app extends react.component, and I got a automatic import up here. So we're gonna have to change this around. So render, we have to have the render method for classes. I can put this return statement in there. And so I've just changed this from a functional component to a class-based component, and everything should work just the same, assuming that I didn't break anything. So my state still works, but my state is local to text box, not app. So what we need to do is give state to the app. So state, actually we can just paste this in from here. Okay. So we're gonna have, starting from now, nothing's gonna work until we get this all set up. So we have our state here in app, but we need to the information that we're getting from the user that's going to change our state, it's actually going to change our state, is still coming in from this component. So we have a problem here where we need to change the state in app based on what's happening in a child component. So this is a common issue. So in React, basically information can only flow downwards, only flow from a parent to a child. You can't really pass information from a child to a parent, at least not directly. So the workaround for that is to pass in a function. So there's a function in the parent. We pass it down as a prop to a child, and then the child can call that function and change stuff in the parent. So we have our state here. We'll have to have some kind of function. So what we can do is, let's see here. Yeah, so we'll have something that changes the state. So kind of just like a handler function, but for just changing the state at the app level. And then we'll pass that down, and we'll call it in our handle on change function, or actually it'll probably be in here. So when someone changes their input, this handle on change will get called. This will call here. It'll check if it's a palindrome or not. If it is a palindrome, then it will call the function that we pass down from here. They will change the state here instead of changing it locally in the text box component. So we can call this something like that, and that will equal a function. And let's just say it's new status, something like that. All right, so here again, we're going to use the built-in, since class-based component, we'll use the built-in set state. So this dot set state, and in this case is palindrome. It's going to equal the new status, and that'll just be true or false depending on what we get from text box. Okay, so now we have this function here. We have state. We've pulled state up from a child component into a parent component, and we have this callback that we want the child to use to actually change the state on the parent. So how do we give the child access to this function? Well, we have to pass it down as a prop. Let's do that. We can call this whatever we want, but I'll just give it the same name. Change palindrome state, and that will equal this dot change palindrome state. Okay. So we have this. So we have our state here, and at the app level, we have this callback function, or this function that we want to pass down. We're passing it down as a prop. So now within text box, if we want to call change palindrome state, which we want to do here and or here, we won't do this dot set state or anything, so we don't have set state. We're gonna have to access the prop. So this dot props dot check if what was that? Change palindrome state. And we'll pass it in a Boolean. So in this case, it'll be true. And here it'll be false. So we'll get rid of that. Okay, so we still have some warnings. So state is not defined. Oh, okay. So I should have done that. So I am putting all this stuff inside the render. I wasn't paying attention to where I was putting it. So you don't do that inside the render. So we have state and change palindrome state. So let's check and see if this works. All right. We'll use our React, the React tools here, so we can check out status. So notice that text box doesn't have state anymore, right? The state is on app. So you can see it starts off as true. We hit A, it's still true. Now it's false. Now it's true again. So it looks like that is now working. Okay. So what we've done is we've successfully moved around our state from a child component to a parent component. And so the child component is changing the state in the parent via a callback that the parent is giving it. Okay. So we have the basic structure now, but we need to also think about the message. So we haven't talked about the message component, but what we need to do is render a message that's appropriate to whether or not it is a palindrome. And since we have that information included in our state, what we can do is include the message here in app and pass it whatever our state is. So let's just get the message started and displaying before we start worrying about that. So import React from React class message component. And our one necessary method for class-based components is render. And we'll return something. For now, let's just do h3. Something like that. And so we have this component, but it's not connected to anything else. One, we need to export. We need to export it. So export default message. And then we're going to have to import it here. So import message from components / message. And then we can just throw that in right here. And we should see this message component displayed. Okay, so it's not doing anything really, but it is there, so it's connected up properly. So we said that whatever a message does needs to be based on this. So again, we can't, if we had, state local to message, we could do that, but then it would be disconnected from whatever's happening in the text box. And since message and text box are siblings, they can't communicate to each other directly. So that's why we need state to be in the parent component so that both of them can share this information. So the only way to get information from a parent to a child is through props. Really, the only way to get information anywhere is through props. So we will do, again, we can call this whatever, but I'm just going to give it the same name. So is palindrome this dot state dot is palindrome. All right, and then in here, we can actually use that. So we'll just see if we can display it. So this yeah, this dot props, right? Because it's a prop now, it's not state. This dot props dot is Palindrome. So we'll see if that works. And that is not working. So app. Okay, so the state is working in app. Message is receiving this prop. Let's just try doing this dot props. Right. So I'm getting this error because I'm, props is an object, and so React doesn't want to render it. So I can just convert this into a string just for now. So we'll see if this is working. Okay, so it looks like that is in fact working. I must have just typed something wrong. Is palindrome. Okay, so that is working now. I can see through my React DevTools that this is also, everything looks good. So there's a couple ways of checking, console logging is great, and doing stuff like this is also fine. It's nice to get immediate visual feedback, and the DevTools are also really handy, especially once things get more complicated. Okay, so now we have, a change, a user does something to change the state of our application in our text box component, and we record that information in our app, so in the parent, and that the parent can now share that information, that state, with another child. In this case, the message component. So what we can do here is use this dot props. Let me just do another. So this dot props dot is palindrome. Right. So we could just simply display here, like it'll say true or false or something like that. We can use a ternary operator, for example, to do, let's see, we'll check if this is true. And if it is true, then we'll say something like, otherwise, and we should probably start, yeah, we are starting with true. Let me refresh this. Okay, so we're starting, still a palindrome, it's not a palindrome, now it's a palindrome. Okay, so we're changing, and we can look at our, let's see, body. You can see that this is changing right here as we do this. All right, so that's the basic idea. So this challenge involves not just having state, but having state in one component, pulling it, having to pull it up into a parent component, and then pass it down as a prop. Also, in order to make this component do that, you have to pass it a callback function from app.js that it uses. Okay, so let's just, so all of our components right now are classes, and that's fine. Everything works, but it's, the newer way of doing this is to use functional components and hooks. So not just, React had functional components before, but they didn't have hooks, so you couldn't do things like change state in a functional component. So the new functional components, you can do that. So we're not going to change all of them, just, but app is the hard one. So let's change that. So I'll comment this out, and we're going to make this a functional component. So we'll do app and we don't need any special methods here. We'll just return whatever we want to return. I'm actually going to copy all of this. So that will be what we return. We'll have to change a couple of these things around, but that's fine. So the issue is, what do we do with this stuff? So we have this state, which we won't really have, at least not in the same way. So in order to use state in a functional component, we're gonna have to import so use state is a use state hook. We'll have to use that. So what we do here, instead of just declaring state, is we'll use destructuring, and the first one will be the actual, like, the state value. So in this case is palindrome. And then the second one will be a function that changes is palindrome. So set and that will equal use state, and we can optionally pass in an initial condition. So we can do that here. We'll set it to true. Okay, so we have this. So now we can use this value directly. So for is palindrome, this dot state dot is palindrome, we can get rid of the this dot state, because that's not how it works now. So we can just give it is palindrome to our message component, and our text box component takes a callback function. So we can basically copy that up here. And we're gonna have to modify this. So we're not gonna call this dot set state. We're going to call our this function right here. So set is palindrome, and that will be whatever the new status is. So whatever Boolean we get there, new status. Okay, and then here, when we pass this down, again, this is not this dot palindrome state. Okay, so I'm getting another error. It's saying that it's not defined. This time, the issue is that it needs to be a const or let or whatever. So const. All right, so we haven't even touched the other components, but here what we've done is instead of having state right here and then calling this dot set state and all that, we're using this use state hook instead. So let's make sure that everything still works. Let's see, so it's a palindrome, still a palindrome, not a palindrome. and it is a palindrome. Okay, so it looks like everything now works. So it'd be, it's a good idea to be able to switch back and forth between class-based components and functional components. If you have time, that's a good thing to try to refactor. So that's it for now.